DET is also very adaptive, and the questions change in
Mhm.
real time on the basis of how the test taker is performing, right?
Right. Yes.
It's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
given the formats that we have been aware of for 2
Yes.
decades. But does it affect a student's score if they stumble early on?
It does and it doesn't. I would say don't worry about it because the real innovation is that we are saving students a lot of unnecessary time. About 1,000 students who took different tests, and I think almost 70% of them said, I would definitely take the TET if given the choice.
Duolingo English test preparing, DET preparing for the AI boom. The way it can game the entire test taking system.
Mm,
Is there
mm.
is there a plan to game the game plan?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. First of all, when students take the Duolingo English test, their computer goes into some sort of a lockdown mode, where we prevent them from accessing other tools. We look at the test responses. We also have internal AI signals that detect responses that were AI assisted.
Hi, I am Sashwati Sarkar, and you're watching The Times of India. Today, we are decoding a test that's challenging traditional English assessments, the Duolingo English Test. From being accepted at Ivy Leagues like Columbia and Yale to becoming a faster, cheaper, AI scored alternative to TOEFL and IELTS, DT is rewriting the rules. But is it really fair to non-native speakers? Can AI-powered tests like these hold up against visa scrutiny in countries like Canada and Australia? Joining us today to answer it all is Carrie Wang, Senior Director and Head of Global Growth for Duolingo English Test. Welcome to the show, Carrie. So, Carrie, as someone who has led market growth in Asia for Duolingo English Test, what have you seen Indian students often getting wrong when it comes to English test prep? And how can they prepare smarter, not harder?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say there's no correct or wrong way to study. Different students have different preferences, and so that's totally okay. I think in general, when I talk to students, when it comes to preparing for an exam, whether an English exam or other exams, there's a really big focus on memorization, and there's a lot of stress that comes with it. And a lot of students feel like these tests are designed to test your test taking ability rather than your actual skills. And that's not how the Duolingo English test works. What I think really differentiates the Duolingo English test, or the DET for short, is that we designed for it to be a real reflection of your English ability. And so instead of worrying about memorizing test formats or how to take tests, just focus on improving your English. Um, as long as you're able to interact in English and deliver authentic responses, you will do well on the test. And for the DET, in addition to improving English, daily English, we also have a lot of free resources. For example, on our website, students can register for free and they can take a practice exam for unlimited number of times entirely for free. And that's a simulated version of the actual test. And so improve your English, take the simulated version of the test for free as many times as you want to get comfortable, and just show up ready to interact and show us what you've got. That's my advice.
Okay, great to hear that. Now, if we could come to numbers a bit, let's talk numbers. How many global universities now accept DET, and what's your traction in countries like UK, US, Canada, post-pandemic?
Great. At this point, close to 6,000 university or higher education programs around the world accept the DET, 5,800 to be exact. I think we have not officially broke the news yet, so you're getting an early scoop. But this number has really steadily grown every year. The DET is a relatively new test, so other tests have been around for a couple of decades, and it took them a few decades to get a few thousand universities to start recognizing and trusting it. The DET is a new test. We were launched about 10 years ago, and just over the past 3, 4 years, we have seen the number of accepting program more than double. So the traction and the growth is strong, and no other tests in this industry have seen this amount of growth. And I think that really shows that universities globally are embracing the DET. In the US, this is the first market where DET started to um, reach out to universities for acceptance. We are very strong. We are nearly universally accepted. Over 4,000 of those 5,800 university programs are from the US. If you look at the top 100 universities in the US ranked by common rankings like the US News, almost all of the top 100 really accepts the DET either for undergraduate or for graduate programs. And so if you're studying in the US, I would say the DET is a no-brainer. Canada is our second most widely accepted market. If you look at kind of the top universities, either by enrollment or by reputation, there's a group of university in Canada called the U15, which include universities like Toronto, Waterloo, McGill, etc. These all accept the DET. So between the US and Canada, it's really near universal acceptance. Most of the schools that students have heard of accept the DET, or they're on their way to updating their website to do so. And these are the markets where Duolingo and the DET started with. We are a bit newer in markets like Australia and the UK, but growth is incredibly strong. In the UK and more broadly in Europe, we have over 600 higher ed programs. And so UK is one. In Ireland, we actually are almost universally accepted by all universities there. And so there is a lot of growth momentum, but we have more work to do in UK and Australia because we're not as universally accepted as some of the existing tests.
Right. Is it only in Australia that there is a resistance towards DET, or it's also in Canada? And if so, what is the reason behind this resistance?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a resistance. I think that we are just very new. Um, as I mentioned earlier, this industry really hasn't seen a lot of disruption. Whether it's university decision makers who are a bit closer to innovation, or some of our policymakers, they just haven't seen new products in this industry for a number of decades. And so, with high stakes product, stakeholders, as they should, take some time to do their due diligence. They want to make sure that any test they introduce, they've taken time to thoroughly assess the tests. Um, and so we really believe it's a matter of time and working with stakeholders, whether in education or in the government space, to make sure that they can understand the DET in the same way they understand some of the existing products. In Australia, they currently do have a list of tests that's required for a visa. And we are talking, we are in the process of applying to become a part of that list. But that's the only country, actually. If you look at other markets, whether it's the US or the UK or Canada at this point, as long as your university accepts the DET, you can take the DET and apply for a visa. In Canada, there used to be a student direct stream that required specific English tests. Last year, the Canadian government sunset that scheme. So now, if you're applying for a visa in Canada, there's only one process, and that process does not have any English requirement. You just need to make sure that you get an acceptance from the university.
So DET tests integrated skills, Carrie, right? For example, writing while listening. Why move away from the traditional section-wise assessment? What's the pedagogical thinking behind this format?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you noticed. It's a very nuanced question for sure. This is one of the innovations that we are hoping to bring into the testing industry, and there are a couple. When it comes to English skills, I was mentioning earlier, we are really trying to measure a student's actual ability to speak and apply English in an academic context. And a lot of your interactions in a university context, um, like all of your real life interactions, they require a combination of skills, right? So traditionally, we think about speaking, writing, listening, and reading as discrete skills, and some other tests will give you a score for each one of them. But our language assessment experts, as they think about it, when you and I have a conversation, I have to speak and I have to listen, right? It doesn't really make sense to be like, I can speak, but I can listen differently. So we created, in addition to the existing kind of speaking, writing, listening, reading skills, we created additional set of integrated skills which combine them. So, for example, we have a combined skill called production, and that requires speaking and writing. And so we are able to combine these skills and assess how students are able to actually use English to achieve tasks. Because we think that's really what we're hoping to measure and what is really valuable for universities.
So, unlike TOEFL or IELTS, DET doesn't have a separate human scoring for speaking and writing, right?
Right.
How
Yes.
do you convince institutions that AI scoring is fair, especially for non native speakers?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. First of all, there is a lot of robust and great research behind all of DET's innovation. And I try my best to learn and represent this fairly, but we have a team of assessment scientists who can do much better justice on the rigor and the science behind how we do scoring and the innovation that we've brought to the industry. Um, I would say ultimately, the fact that so many top-rated universities with some of the world's best English language faculties chose the DET is a good proof of their confidence, right? They voted with their feet. And so I think for someone who is non-technical and for the audience, I think this is the most important thing to know. The DET's validity has been vetted by some of the best universities around the world, and they believe that this is a really good way to measure a student's English ability. We also have a number of research that compares a student's performance on the DET to other tests, and we see very strong concordance, which means our test is equally valid. We use a different method, but equally valid. When it comes to AI scoring, Duolingo is really at the forefront of using AI. We use AI in our language learning product. We also use AI in the English test. And we've been doing so for quite a few years. Because of that, we have accumulated a lot of expertise in figuring out how to train and fine tune and adjust models to make sure that it represents our test taker base, that it measures the thing we want it to measure. And there's a very sophisticated ongoing improvement process to make sure that it's rigorous, it's fair, et cetera. And so I would say this is something that we're very proud of because honestly, humans also make mistakes, right? There's a lot of bias and fairness issues when it comes to having a human rater. There's not a lot of discussion on that somehow because it's the legacy. And I think the way we are using AI, we believe really allow us to use this tool to bring more fairness to the process and bring more innovation to the industry.
So, DET is also very adaptive, and the questions change in real time
Mhm.
on the basis of how the test taker is performing, right?
Right. Yes.
It's fascinating. I mean, given the
Yeah.
formats that we have been aware of for through decades.
Yes.
But does it affect a student's score if they stumble early on?
It does and it doesn't. I would say don't worry about it because the real innovation is that we are saving students a lot of unnecessary time. I mean, I'll give you just a quick explanation on why this is better than the fixed form test, which is when you take other exams, I'm sure everyone has had experience. You know the content cold, but you answer all these simple questions and it just eats up time. And by the time you get to the hard question, which is where you differentiate, you're already very tired. A lot of students have that experience when you have a million people of different skill level taking the same exam. A lot of students actually suffer. And this is why an adaptive test is better. We figure out in the early days that you're at this level, you're at sort of a C1 level. That means you don't have to answer the basic questions that are A2 and B1. Those questions don't really contribute to your score. They just take up more time and they prevent you from doing your best when we're asking you questions that are at your level. So that's why we think that the adaptive experience is actually better for test takers because we're using the time in this exam very well. When it comes to the adaptive nature and why I think students shouldn't worry, the system is fairly intelligent. I don't think we ding people based on one response. And so it's in a dynamic adjustment. We give you a question, we look at your response, we make an adjustment, we give you the next question. Based on that response, we make an adjustment. So students have the opportunity to um, react and adjust multiple times. And over time, the algorithm will converge to its best estimate of where the test takers' levels are at. And so it's a series of interactions where the algorithm will course correct and students will also adapt as they get into the exam.
Carrie, I'm sure you'll agree with me. There are so many tests out there, language tests out there, like IELTS test, TOEFL, PTE, and students. It'll be very fair to say that students are confused at times, right?
Yeah,
How should they
right.
choose the right test for their goals and destination country? What tips would you share with them, while it comes
Yeah.
to choosing the right test?
I'm just curious, so like, have you taken any of these English exams yourself?
No.
Not yet. Okay. Maybe you can try the DET. I would.
Right, Carrie. I will someday, sure.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you're gonna get a very high score because your English is very good.
Oh, thank you.
I
That's
think
a
students
compliment. Yeah.
should try every. Yeah, for sure. Look, I mean, I've been a student myself. I've taken, multiple English tests. I've also taken other standardized exams. Um, as a student, you have to do your homework. I would say check out all the exams, figure out what they're about. But I'm confident that for any test taker, if you've gone through the DET experience, you would think, wow, this is easy. Like when I took the DET for the first time, and I went onto my computer, I did the interaction, I just set up my webcam. It took me 45 minutes to figure out the exam, and it was done. And I submitted it, and I was like, that was it. That was very easy. Like the whole experience was so seamless and so comfortable that I was kind of shocked that it was an exam. Um, and so I feel like for any student, when you've gone through the process and you see that there's a product that allows you to take an exam in your comfort, we're pretty confident that test takers would prefer the DET. I think what's important for students is do your due diligence, try different exams, and two, speak to your university and understand what test they accept. I think as long as your university accepts the DET, it's up to the students, and in our experience, I mean, 99. We did a student survey actually of multiple of about 1,000 students who took different tests, and I think almost 70% of them said I would definitely take the TET if given the choice.
Right. Great to hear that. So, Carrie, in the age of AI, do you think that we even need a language testing? I mean, the way it's done
Mhm.
today. Could AI tools like ChatGPT or Google Gemini game the system?
Um, it's a good question. And I think, at least for now, when it comes to English exams for academic purposes, whether it's studying abroad or just English skills assessment for an academic purpose, the reason why universities are requiring it is they want students who can interact and learn in English. And a lot of these interactions are still, human based, right? You go to a classroom, you need to be able to understand what the professor is saying. You need to be able to go up to a professor and say, "Hey, I had a question from your lecture." You need to interact with your classmates on homework assignments, on shared presentations and projects. That's why English is important. And so I think, at least right now, a lot of that still needs to be a skill that the student themselves possess. And then if you think a bit further out, universities want graduates who can be successful in the workplace. And in the workplace, a lot of jobs require English, not because there are no translation tools, there are plenty of translation tools, but you do need English to be able to work with colleagues from other countries, to work with customers in other parts of the world. And so English is still a very important skill that students and graduates will need to have. And we believe that's why universities will keep requiring English.
And how is actually Duolingo English test preparing, DET preparing for the AI boom? The way it can game the entire test taking system. Is there a plan to game the game plan?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. First of all, when students take the Duolingo English test, their computer goes into some sort of a lockdown mode, where we prevent them from accessing other tools. So they cannot, take the English test and concurrently use an AI chatbot to help them answer the question. That would be a rules violation. We also have a secondary camera that monitors the test environment. So neither on your test taking device or on a secondary device would students be able to access a LLM assistant. That's the test security part. In addition to these sort of physical security measures, which prevent access to LLMs, when we look at the test responses, we also have internal AI signals that detect responses that were AI assisted. So we do have a countermeasure to AI gaming responses, and we do flag responses that have high likelihood of being an AI generated answer, and some of those sessions will get flagged.
It was a very meaningful and insightful conversation, Carrie, and I would look forward to many more such sessions with you in the future.